welcome. We are kicking off a new book here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, and it is an exciting day because we didn't love the last one. So welcome to our discussion. My name is Meagan, and my fabulous co-host is...
This is Amanda.
Hello and welcome. How excited are you to be starting a new book, Amanda?
Well, A, I'm very excited that it's a new book, and B, I'm very excited it's this book. So that's worked out well. I'd never even heard of this book before Meagan was like, this is a great book, let's do it. And I was like, I mean, okay. Well, so I'm here and I'm happy.
Yes, I am excited. So our new book is called Normal Sucks. The tagline to the title is How to Live, Learn, and Thrive Outside the Lines. And it's written by Jonathan Mooney, who is an author who is an ADHD adult, a dyslexic adult. And this is kind of a chronicle of his life and a search for where normal came from, right? What even is normal? We did an episode a couple of weeks back on why are homeschooled kids called weird? And this kind of dovetails in it, right? If you're going to talk about someone being weird, you have to have the opposite of that, right? What are they not? If they are weird, what aren't they? Well, they aren't normal. Okay, well, what's normal? So this book goes super far into that. And we read this as part of a book club selection for a book club that Amanda and I were both in, but I'm guessing maybe you were traveling or something when we read this the first time.
I was probably out of town when this one was.
So I had read it, but Amanda hadn't had a chance. And I remember when we read it originally in our book club, not really having high hopes for it. I kind of had, just from the title, right, Normal Sucks, I kind of had this vision of this book that I read almost 17 years ago now, because that's how old my oldest child almost is, right? There was this book called The Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. Are you familiar with that by any chance?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like a very silly, sarcastic, irreverent look at being pregnant and giving birth, right? It's not the maternal cover of what to expect when you're expecting. It's a very graphic, things that people don't tend to talk about. Like, why aren't we talking about hemorrhoids? Why aren't we talking about pooping yourself when you're pushing and delivering a baby, right? Like, and that was The Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. And so I kind of had that just based upon the title and the cover. Like, I thought we were going to get kind of like this irreverent thing about why normalcy is stupid, right? And I was completely shocked at how much history and how much science was in this book that I absolutely loved it. Did you have any preconceived notions going into this, Amanda?
Honestly, I was a little worried that you picked another sucky book. So you kept promising me it was good, and I was like, we'll see.
Let's hope.
And I agree. I've been really pleasantly surprised. And I guess I should have known, right? My copy, this actually just clearly shows that I didn't pay that much attention until it was time to sit down and read the book. Because my copy at the very front, at the top, it says, as an accessible primer on reassessing disability and mental health, it's invaluable. And as an exploration of what it's like to grow up feeling different, it's incredibly cathartic. And that's from a quote from Vanity Fair. So if I had read that when I actually got it in the mail, instead of just putting it to the side of like, I have to get to that in a couple of weeks, but at least I know I have it ready to go when it's time to start reading it for the next book club. And maybe I would have been a bit more excited to get started instead of dragging my feet. But I did drag my feet, and I read it last night so that I would be prepared for today. And I was happy that I did, right? My husband was sitting not too far away on the couch watching something on TV, and I had my headphones on because I like to listen and follow along in the book so I can more easily annotate as I'm going. And I was laughing out loud, so loud. And he was like, what are you listening to? I was like, my book club book. And he was like, really? Like, didn't you hate book club? I'm like, that was the last book. This one's so much better.
Off that book, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so in short, Jonathan has a really difficult time in school as a dyslexic child with ADHD and is ostracized and is made to feel terrible, is made to feel stupid. I don't think it's necessarily in this first section. I've been reading ahead and kind of getting my notes sorted out for future discussions. So I couldn't tell you exactly what falls in sections 1 and 2, which is what we're discussing today, versus the future, right? But his father is an alcoholic and he has a really unstable childhood. And at one point he explores the ideas of self-harm and things like that. And so you're sitting there thinking like, how are you cracking up laughing reading this book? But somehow he manages to take all of that and write it in such a way that is so funny and so relatable and so irreverent that, I mean, like when he talks about like naked days at home and, you know, his dad walking around naked and, you know, all this kind of stuff and just kind of the quirky things that went on in his life, somehow he manages to make it funny.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, even for me, it was just almost right off the bat, right? So on pages 4 and 5, he tells this story about being at a Mexican restaurant that's got some inappropriate images, like big painting kind of things on the wall. And, you know, how his 6-year-old, you know, I think he describes it something about, you know, how he makes these motions in front of his chest. So there's these pictures of naked women, naked matador women, and his 6-year-old makes these motions in front of his chest in a way that if he hadn't been so cute and only 6 years old, they would have been thrown out of the restaurant, you know. And like just the way he phrases it all, it had me rolling. And it's a type of storytelling that I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably also do it quite a lot in my life. My life is thankfully not quite as messed up as this, you know, growing up, but I have a lot of health problems, and there's a lot of stuff, and we talk about, you know, dysfunctional families and extended families and hard things that have happened. But like I prefer to tell it with like a big dose of humor and sarcasm, and so I very much appreciated this. This is my type of storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, in that spot that you were talking about, it says you pointed to 3 suggestive, okay, completely inappropriate paintings of women as matadors. And then in parentheses, he's got, because we all know that bullfighting is best done in the nude, right? And so there's just kind of these little asides throughout the book that make it so enjoyable to read, even though it's a pretty heavy topic, that he does it in such a way. It kind of reminds me of, have you read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime?
Yeah.
Like only Trevor Noah can make apartheid entertaining and funny, right? I mean, he does such an amazing job of taking really heavy stuff. I mean, Trevor Noah comes from a home with an alcoholic stepfather and abusive and, you know, extreme levels of poverty and extreme levels of social injustice. And somehow the book is hilariously funny. And so I feel like Jonathan Mooney kind of taps into that same vein of writing style here, and it really works.
Yeah, for sure. So in the first section 1, there's he's talking a lot about how he first found out, or was first diagnosed, not first found out, but he first got like a diagnosis of not being normal. And one of the quotes that I really liked that stood out to me was on page 18. And they've just had their first meeting at the school. We have talked in different podcasts that we've had about those IEP meetings and the assessments that are done at school and what it feels like, right? When they sit you down to tell you all the things that are wrong with your child and all the ways they're not actually going to help you. And it's, you know, it's brutal. There's no one who has attended any sort of, you know, resource meeting that came out of that meeting feeling well. I'm like, oh, life is great. Like, that's not what they're for. You don't feel
Positive
that way.
and hopeful.
No. And if you are randomly listening to us and you have found a team that makes you feel that way, for the love of God, do not leave that team, right? Like, you have found the Holy Grail.
They are the one and only.
Yeah, exactly. But so in any event, they've just had this meeting, they leave, and he asks her a question. She goes back in and just lays into the administration about the way that they have done this with the child present, because that's a big thing. If you don't know, when you have these IEP meetings, they oftentimes want the child there to be a part of it, which is like, yeah, okay, you know, like for the most part, they hear a lot of really awful things, and so like, yes, they need to learn to self-advocate, but maybe not just yet. So in any event, the quote itself, page 18, says, "Whatever she said, though I knew the real answer, I had crossed that invisible line between the normal and the not normal, which we all know is there, though we aren't quite sure where it is at the time, or who drew it, or how or why. At that moment, I knew for sure that whatever normal was, I wasn't it." And I think, you know, for those of us who aren't normal for whatever reason, there is that moment, right, where we realize it. Something happens and we just really realize, like, okay, yeah, I'm not normal. And I mean, everyone handles it differently. A lot of times the instinct is to try to figure out how to get to normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes you're lucky enough to come from a situation where normal isn't embraced, and so maybe you feel less pressure to try to be normal. I don't think, in my case, I don't think I ever tried particularly hard to be normal. Um, but I am sure that there are times that I wished I was more normal, right? That I wished I fit in better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it's hard to not, it's like, I don't, there's that saying, right? Something about like the nail that sticks up is the nail that gets hammered down kind of thing. And that's a reality in our society. So that quote, I was just like, oh, that really, and it's an excellent example about how it can set the tone, and you know that you're talking about some serious stuff, but it's just handled so well. It's done so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a similar thought about on just the page prior. Well, first off, there was a part that I loved because he talks about his, you know, years and years and years struggle with spelling. And he talks about like being frustrated with the fact that there's a right way and a wrong way to spell everything. And he says there was a time we all agreed to just let the stuff go. Sure, that time was the 1500s and spelling wasn't codified, but people got by. One word could be spelled 10 ways. Those were the good old days. Pennycamp Elementary School, however, did not believe in the restoration of old English spelling conventions. So I learned to dumb it down. So he talks about his experience, right? And it's just kind of his way of saying those things. But I loved at the bottom of that page on 17 where it says, my spelling and writing made me seem stupid. So then I was treated as if I was stupid. Then I began to believe I was stupid, and then I began to act stupid, and then do it all over again the next day. And one of the things that I've seen, and I feel like it's getting lesser than it was before, but one of the things that I've seen is this fear of a diagnosis or fear of a labeling, right? Well, I don't want my child labeled. I don't want to label my child. And so one of the big things that I've always seen is whether or not you give that child a label, they will know they are different. They will know there is something there. And at least the label tells them that it's not them. It's not that I'm the only person in the world who's like this. It helps them understand those things. And so I felt like this thing on page 17 was such a great example of, if you do not get your child the proper label, they will label themselves. And it will not be a good label.
Mm-hmm. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is always power. I'm a huge believer in that. And it's that, you can label with the right label, and then you can find out more, and you can, you just know more. And the more you know, the better you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can leave it as the unknown. And very rarely do we come to the right conclusion in the unknown.
Yep. Yeah, it turns out that the child ends up either their teacher, their peers, whoever, or they themselves are labeling themselves. I'm stupid. I'm lazy. I'm scattered. I'm this. I'm that. I'm the other thing. And the reality is, you're not. You're autistic. You're ADHD. You're dyslexic. You have, you're this. You're that. You're the other thing. But without knowing that, and then you're sitting there thinking, I'm the only person who's like this. Everybody else is doing great, and I'm the only one who's stupid, lazy, this, that, whatever they've kind of self-defined those things to be, which has been huge. I've talked before, and I will get you to someday watch the Hannah Gadsby special, Douglas, on Netflix.
I watched it.
Did you?
Yes, we watched everything of hers on Netflix, maybe
She's
a weekend
amazing,
or two ago.
isn't she?
It was awesome. I will admit I'm not quite ready to put my kid in front of it. I'm not judging. I'm not judging because we're a judgment-free zone. I'm not quite ready to sit down and watch it with my kiddo. But I mean, my husband and I watched it together. We were in tears, but like half of the time in tears from laughing and half of the time in tears because like it's really fucking good and it's really fucking serious. And she's on it about things that she shouldn't be on it about, right? Like they're awesome. They're really good.
But I watched it with my kiddo, and he's 12 now. We probably watched it. Okay, we probably watched it when he was about 9 or 10, about the age of your kiddo. And yeah, at the time I was like, this is totally inappropriate, but I really don't care. So I totally get where you're coming from. But he had this moment after he watched it where he was like, that was me. She gets me. She totally understands. That's how I feel. And it kind of opened this dialogue where my kids are a little older, they have social media access, etc. He's not a huge social media user. He actually doesn't, he's not on he has Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, but he's never on them. The one thing he does like to watch are YouTube shorts. And he's trained his algorithm really well. He gets stuff that he finds funny and relates to Pokemon and whatever, but the really cool thing is he gets a bunch of stuff on neurodivergence. And he'll send me stuff sometimes. Like one time he sent me a video that was a whole bunch of audio tracks that were completely different speeds, tones, and pitches. And they were all playing simultaneously on top of one another. And he sent it to me and it was created by someone who was neurodivergent explaining what it sounded like in their head. And he sent it to me and said, this is what it sounds like in my head. How would I have known that? Without that? That's not what it sounds like in my head. So how would I have that understanding without that? And so giving him exposure, and I'm not saying this to convince you that you should let your kid watch Hannah Gadsby, but like any exposure to anybody, whether it's Hannah Gadsby, Jonathan Mooney, another author who's writing about their ADHD experience in an age appropriate way, right? For them to realize like, I'm not alone. It's not just me. It's not just me. I'm not the only one. Right. That's so powerful as opposed to just sitting there thinking, well, I'm stupid. Right. Because, and the mom's sitting there going, I don't want to label them because, it'll follow them or it'll be harmful or whatever. And I'm like, the lack of label is actually so harmful in so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I also firmly believe that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right. So that was section 1 and you're still on board with the book. So I've made a good selection after my first really rocky pick. So what you got in section 2?
Yeah. So section 2 actually really starts that deep dive into normal. What is normal? How did we get the term normal? And so, actually right off the bat, the start of section 2 on page 23, there's a quote. It says, we use normal without thinking in casual conversation to judge people's actions and behaviors, to draw our own lines of who is in and who is out, to sharpen our individuality and cleave away the others.
Cleave is such a good word.
Oh, damn, I do. And it really struck me because I have talked often throughout this podcast about the fact that I am not normal and I don't generally strive to be normal. I'm really confident and comfortable being the special cup of tea that I am. And I know I'm not everyone's flavor. And I work really hard to encourage my kiddo to embrace that and to understand that he can be whoever he is and whoever he wants to be, and that he should absolutely embrace that and go out in the world like that. And the people who appreciate that and love that will, be drawn to him. And the people who don't, we don't need to waste our time with that nonsense. And I didn't necessarily grow up in an environment where that got to be the overarching theme, right? And so I work really hard to create that environment in my own home. Mm-hmm. But holy hell, I do this. I use normal all the time to describe things or to talk about things. And I don't mean it to be, but I am 100% positive that it does judge people or situations or, patterns, habits, behaviors. Oh,
yeah. And so on the next page, it kind of continues with that. And it says on page 24, you need to know that normal has a history. You may assume that this is a history of discovery, that somewhere at some point someone found out what was normal for human beings. And normal people are often presented like that as facts in the world. But that's not true. That is a lie. It's a lie that gives normal such power in our lives. And while normal has a history, it is not a history of discovery, but a history of invention. Normal hasn't always been normal. And that's where this really deep kind of chronological timeline of normalcy kicks off, going back to the a couple hundred years ago. It's amazing.
Though I have to say that I love that's what you highlighted on page 24. And on page 24, I highlighted, damn, more books to read. Because there are other, he lists some in his oh, these are, and I was like, oh, I want to know more about those books. I want to do a bit of deep dive on what the hell they were saying in those books.
Hey, have you flipped to the back yet? There are.
No.
So
much. No. Oh my God.
Starting on 219. 219. Just pages of pages and pages and pages of citations for where all this stuff came from. So that's only the start of your additional reading if you're going to flip through that.
Oh, I'm going to need months until we can start our next book club. I'm sorry, Megan. I'm still reading the things from Normal Sucks. I'm sorry.
Still deep diving Normal. Yeah. That's okay, because I have Jonathan Mooney's other two books on my desk. He also wrote The Short Bus, A Journey Beyond Normal, and then he wrote another one called Learning Outside the Lines. And that's co-written with a gentleman named David Cole. That says 2 Ivy League students with learning disabilities and ADHD give you the tools for academic success and education revolution. And so I've read Normal Sucks. Now this is my second time reading it, but I am determined to get through those others that have been sitting on my bookshelf for an embarrassingly long time. So I took them off the bookshelf to guilt myself and to read it because I know they're amazing. We have a friend, our mutual friend Tara is reading The Short Bus and said, she cried in I think on page 5, she was crying, not tears of laughter, but just, yeah, it's an incredibly moving experience when he talks about his journey through this world as the individual that he is. And so when she said that, I was like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm getting it done. As soon as I finish my reread of Normal Sucks, I'm diving right into it. So we'll see. Getting there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of good things to read out of this. And they'll probably be far better recommendations than the things that came out of the last book. We're talking about, and we talked about this in the last book, right? I enjoy certain types of history, not World War II history, as we also will talk about. But I do enjoy certain types of kind of deep dive. This is how we got here. This is how things happen. And that's what this section does. It looks at when it started and how it evolved. And I found it, again, he does it in a really funny way, right? He uses his own writing style, which makes it really enjoyable to follow along with. And it's finished a lot faster than you want it to be. So on page kind of 26 and 27, he's talking about the history of how normal came to be and that it started as a math concept. And then in the mid 1800s, it was used in anatomy and physiology. And so that's where we start using this word normal to mean it has a very specific from a math connotation. And then it kind of moves over into anatomy and what doctors would do. But it's also important to remember that you're talking about, early to mid 1800s. So doctors weren't exactly doing the best things, right? And so take their version of normal with a grain of salt.
Exactly. There's a reference in here to them using leeches still at that time. So yeah, it's not exactly high science at this point in history.
Yeah.
There's also on 26, and this is one of the things that I love about this book is, so I kind of marked this as the start of this kind of timeline that I was drawing in my head while I was reading this. It says, so who used normal and why and how? Normal was first used outside the mathematical context in the mid 1800s. This is what you were just saying, by a group of men. And then I love the fact in parentheses, he says, gender pronoun alert, everyone in the history of normalcy is a man, right? And it goes on to talk as we kind of move through these studies about how it's, white, middle-aged, educated Christian men are basically the standard of normalcy because that's who was conducting the study. And shockingly, somehow their research always concluded that they were the barometer for normal.
Yeah.
Right? Anyone who was different, not normal. And so it's interesting as he kind of points, like he just pulls no punches as far as calling that out and calling a spade, which I love. It's kind of makes the book super enjoyable when I read it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it says on 27, normal isn't just not abnormal, but it is an upper middle class, suburban, straight, able-bodied, and mentally fit married white dude with 2.5 kids. This is normal. Anything else, completely abnormal.
Yeah, no. And just shortly before that, oh, actually, you just read it. I was like, they never did find or define the normal state. They defined normal as what is not abnormal. But the definition we do have, and it's so true. I mean, and we're kind of screwed, right? I guess we're probably, in fairness, we're probably both upper middle class. I'm definitely not suburban. I failed there. I am straight. I am not able-bodied. I'm far from able-bodied and mentally fit. Well, some people would question that, but I'm going to give that to myself. I am married a couple times. And I'm not a white dude and I'm not married to a white dude. So I think we've failed there. And with 2.5 kids, I mean, I did have a half kid, but I was like, well, what am I going to do with this half kid? No, I'm kidding. I have one child.
You got to meet up with somebody else and combine the two halves, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to have play dates sometimes, so you've got a whole child.
Exactly, right? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't fit the definition of normalcy either. I don't think anybody in my household would. And so, yeah, I mean, same thing. Not married to a white dude, and I am suburban. Yes, but the upper middle class, right? Mentally fit, up for discussion. It depends on what everyone else's baseline layer of anxiety on a day-to-day basis looks like. Which on the next page, it talks about the fact that what is average has become normal, right? So what is the average of anxiety? I don't know. You let me know, and then we'll figure that out together. We can figure out that next one. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Everyone's got long COVID now, so maybe my cognitive deficiencies are average. Maybe I'm good
the
now.
Average. You're good. Yeah. So on the next page, it pinpoints on page 28 normalcy going back to 1713 with a Swiss mathematician. Then we've got a few hundred years later, this guy named Adolphe. Okay, you were listening. You said you did audio. I have been saying this guy's name as Quetelet, but I have no idea if that's correct. What is it in the audio?
I think it was maybe Coudelet, but it might have been Coudelet. I was definitely like, wow, there are a lot of names in here that I'm going to butcher when we actually have the podcast.
I know. I mentioned before that I lead a book club for mainly middle schoolers and like lower level or lower aged high schoolers. And our audiobook kids, when they show up, we have a handful that just process better through audio. And when they show up, we're all like, how do we pronounce this city? Or how do we pronounce this person's name? We're so thankful for the audiobook kids when they come because they can help with that, right? But they talked about, him. So the first guy in 1713, and then this guy who I call Quetelet in 1835, whose goal was to gather massive amounts of statistical data about any given population and calculate the mean or the most commonly occurring or various sets of traits, height, weight, eye color, etc. And later added in qualities such as intelligence, morality, and used these to create the average man for society. But then, as Jonathan Mooney does, and midway down page 29 in parentheses, racism alert, unsurprisingly, he found in his study that Black people weren't normal. Shocking. Shocking.
I have the exact same note, right? Mine says page 29, 1835, already saying the average man as statistical abstraction, but then also saying that there are types and Scottish men are the right type and Black people aren't normal. Like, okay, there you go. Like, so it's just abstract. But when it wasn't abstract, you really want, and I love a Scottish accent, don't get me wrong, but I'm not positive that that's normal or average,
Yeah,
especially based
or
on go ahead.
representative of the majority. I mean,
Yeah.
it's Scotland's this
Especially based
big.
on their number, yeah, their population. Like you don't run into a lot of Scottish accents, so I'm gonna say not the statistical average.
Yeah, I mean, great country, but what we should all use as our barometer? Maybe not. I don't know. I'm just saying. So,
Hmm.
oh my gosh. It talks too on page 30, it talks about the fact it says, for example, when he calculated the average age of a population, he took out all the kids.
Hmm.
That's a great way to I mean, I'm not, listen, I am the farthest thing from a mathematician. Okay. Like, we are not that. But I am aware you cannot just take out the lower, 10% of all the numbers and then call your average an average. It says when he was studying what was quote unquote natural for women, he used data from men.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
But the thing is, that stuff still happens, right? Like, how
Yes.
often are prescription dosages based on the average man? I have a note in here that I had to see. I have a cardiologist, and the first step with the cardiologist was going to get like an extensive EKG, and I was kind of worried, right? Because the reading, like the high level report says like, oh, everything looks fine. But when you go in and look at the numbers, there was a whole set of numbers that were not in the normal range, right? They were outside of the normal range. And I was like, okay, I really can't wait to see the cardiologist and ask about this, right? And I asked the cardiologist, and he's just says, oh, well, you're a bit smaller than average, and so it's perfectly normal for you. We would you're petite, so we would expect your rate, your numbers to be a little smaller. And like, okay, I'm 5'4". Uh, I'm certainly not as tall as a lot of the people in my family, but I don't think 5'4" is terribly far outside of like middle range for women. I mean, yes, of course there are taller ones, but there are quite a few shorter ones too, like 5'4" to 5'6". Like, really? Like, how am I like that bizarrely outside of the range that I don't fall in the normal range of things? Because they've done this data and the research on men, and they're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, well, no, of course I'm small for a man, as it turns out. Like,
I saw something online a couple months ago, maybe, or something. I was looking at something and it talked about the fact that, right. Okay. So in your example, I can kind of, it's not right. Okay. Right. Or we should be studying all genders. But at least each gender has a heart. We can agree upon that, right? Okay. But I saw something talking about period products, right? Like tampons, cups, pads, all that kind of stuff, right? And it said they only started using actual blood to test these products recently. They were using like red liquids beforehand that were like maybe kind of viscous, maybe not. I don't know, right? And it's like,
we added some
okay,
cornstarch. It's almost the same.
practically the same thing. And it's like, you literally, oh my gosh, like, could you imagine any other product and they just don't even test it with the thing that it's going to be used for? Like, it makes no sense.
Yep.
You would think at some point somebody would have been like, wow, to test if these are actually effective, maybe we should, blah, blah, blah. No. Mm-mm.
Oh, that's
Why
gross.
would we do that?
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who wants to do that, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you. Yeah, so I love it. I mean, Jonathan Mooney concludes it's as if he found that cats are the average pet by averaging only people who had cats. It's like, that's about how scientific the definition of normalcy is.
Yep.
It's bananas.
All right. So I'm trying to look at what my next note is. So they're a little jumbled, so I'm just going to go ahead and read them, the next two that I have. So on page 34, we move into the sex scientists of the early 1900s. And one of the quotes that I especially liked from here was, the informal leader of this whole crew was, of course, Sigmund Freud. Yes, the man with a cocaine habit that could have killed a small farm animal was one of the most important thinkers in the history of normality. I'll skip the long dissertation on Freud and spare you the pain of reading his tomes, but bottom line, it's all about sex. all of it, everything. One's whole personality, thoughts, aspirations, hopes in the world, favorite color, food, flavor of ice cream, whatever.
Yeah.
All of it. It all comes down to sex. Like, once again, great point, valid point, presented in a really humorous way that made me
Yeah.
enjoy reading the point.
And there's something else, and I was just trying to skim through and look for it for a second, but I can't remember where it was. And I love the fact that he says like, oh, here, it's on the bottom of 35, where he says, they were talking about the concept of nearly normal. And he says, what the hell does it mean to be nearly normal? This makes my head spin. There is a normal, but I'm not it. However, I shouldn't accept this fact, but instead strive for normality that no one can be. And oh yeah, here's a bunch of things you can buy and people you can pay to help you overcome your near normality disorder. And then I love this line where he says, I can see why Freud needed all that cocaine. Like, yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to do those kind of logic loops, you might need to self-medicate. I don't know.
Exactly.
So going back just a little, I have a note that from pages 33 to 34, there's a quote. It says, the first major book on this subject, again referring to the sex scientists, was Psychopathia Sexualis, written by Richard von Krafft-Ebing or something like that. I'm probably butchering it because I did not read the podcast. Someone else read it and I just listened to it and then didn't remember how to pronounce it. So he goes on to say, he was a true jerk, and I could disparage him for so many reasons. At the top of the list, that he was among the first to declare that people who had encounters with the same sex were sick and deviant and should go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on to say that from this, Freud creates the idea that everyone is a little perverted and sick. And so grows out of that the idea that people are nearly normal and should work to become fully normal, even though it's not possible to become fully normal. But you should work towards it. And that's actually like super great for business and capitalism, you know, basically, right? Because now you've got therapists and self-help books and Instagram. Are all of the ways to have a beige home and be normal.
TikTok therapy, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's bananas. And how many people are using this word every single day without any concept of the origin of the word? Mm-hmm. Or how many people are beating themselves up every day for not being that thing without realizing the origin of the word? It's like, I loved all of this history that's here. The next large scale study was in 1930, that was conducted on young men at Harvard, because nothing says, you know, widely diverse sample population like 1930s Harvard. Talk about white, wealthy, smart Christian men.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the important part, is that at that time, Harvard only accepted white men.
Yeah.
So, you know, to make that your, hey, I mean, Harvard was even then an elite school, and an elite school that's only admitting white men. Yeah, sure. Let's go use them as our sample. You know, that's quality research. Super well. I'm peer reviewed. Great. I'm great research.
Exactly. Right. So, you know, translation of the results of the study. The normal men of this study were normal because they were successful in a system that was dominated by men just like them. Wow. Right? You're thriving in an environment that was custom built for you? That's shocking. You are normal.
Good for you.
As my 12-year-old would say, what time should I schedule the medal ceremony for? That's like one of his favorite.
I love it.
Favorite things. You are normal if your behavior, appearance, and background are the dominant culture. Boom. I mean, we know this. This isn't like, that aspect of it isn't shocking. And yet for some reason, like you said, there's still this mega bucks industry of therapists. And we're not saying therapy isn't a great thing, right? But if you're
I'm super pro therapy. I'm in therapy right now. Thank you very much. Like I love therapy, but
yeah. But if your therapy is trying to make you normal, right?
Yeah.
That is it, right? The self-help books and, you know, Dr. Phil and all that other baloney, right? Like not all of that necessarily, right? So you are normal if you fit into this culture and are therefore deemed normal by school, church, the town, the doctor, the professor. Normal is what works in society's norms. And there is just no room in our society for the people who don't fit in those norms, which is criminal and abusive and discriminatory on every level, right?
Yeah, but I do think that our society is getting better about having room and space for people who don't fit in those norms, right? For the people who are on the 25% on each side, right? If we're sticking to the math idea of
Mm-hmm.
normal. It's not, I mean, we have a long way to go, but we are improving.
Mm-hmm.
I have to
We
believe
are.
that.
I think to an extent we are. And then I think about people who are like, um, if we were to make an exception for, a child that needs like a sensory friendly experience or something like that, right? You can just hear that population that's like in my day, or like, they're like, they need to toughen up and, calling them snowflakes or whatever else, and the whole thing. And it's like, so I think we are getting there, but I think there's still that mentality that it's like, it's too soft to be considerate of people who are outside that median of the bell curve. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's just humanity, right? That's just kindness. And there's going to be an instance where you're outside the bell curve for something, right? Something else.
Yeah.
And you'd want someone to consider your needs, to factor your needs, and to be kind and to be human towards you. So I think we're getting there. It can be a bit tough, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah, that's
Slowly.
it. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure we're getting there, but I do think it's improving.
There's movement.
Right? Yeah, that's it. There's
a little
movement.
movement.
That's like, when you've been really sick and someone is like, "How are you?" and you're like, you say, "Well, I'm better," but I'm not better. I'm just better than I was.
Right.
Like,
I'm vertical now, right? Or
yeah.
I'm dressed and I've brushed my teeth. So we've made progress.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you think about the search for Norma and Norman? Did you want to share about that section?
Yeah, so my notes just say like it's a good story, right? And I happily read along and I followed along, but it is kind of a long story in here. So there's a few pages where I didn't write very much because I'm kind of following this story. But so I think the newspaper was in Cleveland and they decide they're going to do this big advertising campaign and contest to find normal based on these measurements that have been published of what a normal woman and a normal man looks like, but they focus on the woman, right? Because of course sex sells. And so they have over 3,000 women who, think that they might fit this idea of normal, and they submit their measurements, and they pick a woman who is supposed to embody normal. But then even then they, at the end, they announce her as the embodiment of normal, and then they admit that she doesn't actually fit the measurements that were published, right? Because of all of the women, no one actually fit the measurements that were published. And so
Isn't that encouraging as a woman in this society?
Right. Yeah.
There's literally no one that can achieve the perfect ideal, but all of you should continue to try.
You should keep going. Yeah, exactly. And that's it. His quote, he wraps it up with like, "Tough break. The judges of normality have spoken. There is a normal. It's an impossible thing to be, so don't stop trying to be it."
Exactly. And I feel like the timing of this, so our next section of reading, I think it's in 3 and 4, but I don't remember exactly. We're going to get into eugenics, and there's going to be a whole thing, which of course we can't not talk about, the Nazi eugenic program in that, right? So this whole competition that is kicked off by this Cleveland newspaper is in 1945. That is the year World War II ends, right? And I'm like, how are we putting out measurements of the exact ideal human after what has just happened for the past 10 to 15 years in Nazi Germany, of people's foreheads and the distance between their eyes and the width of their chin and the width of their nose and the length of their earlobes and all of this, right? Like, and yet we're sitting here thinking like, this is a solid plan. We should definitely, basically mirror that same concept, looking for the perfect man and the perfect woman. Like, it's absolutely insane. And I mean, it says here on 39, it says, so here it is. And it was on the front page of the newspaper. In 1945, it says the United States had nuked Japan. German death camps have been liberated. Europe is in ruins. And for 10 days, the fourth largest newspaper in the country ran front page stories about normality. Like, that's how high this pressure is in our rank in our society. It's bananas.
It is bananas, but how, like, what kind of a sad state of affairs that, like, in an attempt to get back to normal, we're going to do this thing where we ask everyone to try to prove how normal they are, right? Like, we've just had 2 back-to-back wars with a Great Depression in the middle where everyone lost everything. So we're going to get back to normal by talking about normal, and we're going to pretend like none of these awful things have happened, right? Like,
that's a good point.
And a lot of people do that, right? A lot of people in our house, we've been talking a lot recently about the fact that you cannot make decisions based on what you wish would happen or what would happen in your ideal world. You have to make decisions based on the reality of the facts and the reality of the situation, right? And Cleveland newspaper was not doing that. They were definitely creating a bit of a fantasy world of like, hey, let's get back to normal by talking about normal. We're going to pretend like nothing else has happened. Ooh.
Looking for Norman and Norma, right? Like, oh my goodness, it's bananas.
And someone made a lot of money off of that. Let's get back to normal by talking about normal. We're going to look for the normal people called Norman and Norma. That's a great idea. Bonus for you, Bob.
I know. I have this vision. Did you watch that series Mad Men with John Hamm? It was on like years ago.
Watched it.
Oh, it was an awesome TV show, right? But it was this super testosterone-driven ad agency of the 60s, right? And so I have like the 1940s version of like the newspaper room with the same thing, like all the guys in their suits with their cups of coffee, like, patting each other on the back and masters of the universe, testosterone land, being like, great idea. Let's run these stories.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, no, for real. So yeah, I have enjoyed this book so far, and I'm looking forward to we're actually doing a small road trip tomorrow, and I think we're going to listen to the audio version as a family, at least for part of the road trip tomorrow, because I just think it's that solid. But I'm going to wrap up this section 2 with kind of the final words of the chapter, because it just really hits home, right? This is one of those quotes that should be up everywhere. It should be on a poster everywhere so people remember it.
We need t-shirts.
Yeah. Maybe that should be our first merchandise. We'll ask him if we can quote him.
Exactly.
So it says, normal was created, not discovered, by flawed, eccentric, self-interested, racist, ableist, homophobic, sexist humans. Normal is a statistical fiction, nothing less. Yes.
It's amazing. I love that line.
Just yes. Right? Yeah. Just yes. That's all you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So you kind of referenced, and we've mentioned it before, but Jonathan Mooney is going to be our guest in a couple of weeks. So if you're reading along with us, awesome. If you're not, that's okay too. We always are happy to give you kind of the highs and lows, and more highs in this book. The lows are more the cultural lows, not the writing, not the subject of the book, but more the historical events are more the lows.
Yeah, the how the fuck did we get here lows.
Exactly. Plenty of those.
Not the why the fuck are we still reading this idiot's words lows.
That was the last book. P.S. In the next section of reading, there's a John Holt reference. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah. love it.
It's like, get yourself ready. We'll have to tell Jonathan Mooney when he comes on and be like, so before this, we've read a book that claims dyslexia doesn't exist by John Holt. So
And
yeah,
watch his head explode, hopefully.
exactly. So when we're done reading this book, we will have an episode, a Q&A with Jonathan Mooney about, his life, his experience, his writing, his books, his view on education, all kinds of amazing stuff. So we're super excited about that. He'll be our first official author visit too, which is super awesome. So yeah, we will be back next week with the next section of reading, which gets, as I mentioned, there's some eugenic stuff coming. It gets a little bit heavy, to say the least. But he still has a Jonathan Mooney way of making it light enough that you enjoy reading it at least. So
yeah,
pretty good stuff. All right. So far a better pick. We're doing okay here, right?
Yeah. I'm enjoying this one.
Nice. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and happy homeschooling. And we'll talk to you next week.
Yep. See you then.